Hello and welcome to the Book, Business, and Brand Building Summit. I'm your host, Jesse Krieger, and today I am joined by a good friend, fantastic author, and just somebody that I both admire and enjoy working with, Dr. Clark Gaither, aka Dr. Burnout. Clark, how you doing?
Doing great, Jesse.
Welcome to the summit, my friend.
Awesome to be here.
I'm going to give a little overview and then we'll dive in. We've got an exciting interview planned today. And of course, the Book, Business, and Brand Building Summit is all about how to leverage your book to build a thriving business and brand, because let's be honest, even as an author with multiple books in the market, there's a pretty good chance that you're not making your primary income from book sales alone. So in this summit, we're exploring how do you really leverage that book to build out coaching, training programs, live events, masterminds, all other types of business and business development activities that are really facilitated by having a book. And so in today's interview, we're going to hear a little bit about Clark's story and how he came to write not one, not two, but now he's got just about 3 books out in the market. I know he's got more in him. And he also has a sort of storied career as a physician working with people that experience professional burnout. And so you can see behind me, got a couple of his books floating around, the Reignite Workbook, Powerful Words, which you also see behind him at his studio. And as we jump into it, Clark, maybe you can give us a little background on yourself and sort of share the story on how you came to write what I believe was your first book, Powerful Words, certainly the first one that we worked together on the publishing side.
Yes, well, I'm a family physician. I have been practicing in Goldsboro, North Carolina for the last 24 years. And about 4 years ago, something what could be considered tragic happened. It turned out to be great in the end, but I decided to go on a hiking trip to Spain. I felt a need for some change of, scenery or venue. I needed to get away for some clarity. And so I booked this hiking trip. I went to La Gomera, which is the second smallest of the Canary Islands. And they're off the coast of Morocco, but they're governed by Spain. And so I went there and hiked for a week. It's a favored hiking destination, especially for Europeans. And the first day was the longest hike, and I gained and lost the most altitude on that hike. So I started out in the morning and it began to rain. It was overcast and it began to drizzle a little bit and it turned into a rain. And that was the only day it actually rained. But I hiked through the rain up the side of this mountain. It took me hours and hours to get to the top. And once I reached the summit, it was completely enshrouded in cloud. I couldn't see more than 50 feet in front of me. And I thought, well, this is ironic. I came here for some clarity and I can't see anything. And so I sat down and thoughts turned inward, and I began to, I asked myself this question: how did I get here? How did I get to La Gomera, Spain? I'm sitting at the top of this mountain enshrouded in cloud. I came here for clarity. I can't see anything. What were the steps, or what were the events that led to me being there at that moment? And so I began to reflect on my life, and the seeds of the book, Powerful Words, were planted right there at the top of that mountain on that hiking trip. So I'd been blogging for a while, and when I got back, I started looking at all of my content that I had online, and there was a theme running through a lot of the posts. And so I printed them all out, and I arranged them in some semblance of order, and that was about 60% of the book actually was already written. And of course I had to go back and rewrite a few things to make it flow a little better. But that process and the other 40% of the book took another 3 or 4 months. So all totaled, it was about 8 or 9 months getting that book to you. And of course you helped me launch it to #1 in several categories, in fact. And that was last May 18th or 19th, I think.
Good memory there. So, for somebody that's just meeting you and finding out about you for the first time, how would you describe Powerful Words, what it's about, and who it's for?
Well, it was really a reflection of my experience on that trip. we all have powerful words and stories in our life history. Everybody's got those powerful words. They're embedded in the stories of your life. And when you share those words and stories with another person, you connect with them on an emotional level. And that's where we have our greatest influence. And so that book is all about getting your powerful words and stories out and onto paper. We all have powerful words and stories in our past. They matter. Your message matters, and that means you matter. And so I think it's important that people go back and do a review of their life and how they got to where they are now, and what were those events and how they shaped you and continue to shape you as you go through your life. And when you share your personal stories with other people, then that's when you connect with your audience on an emotional level.
Sure. And I know that in a way you're sort of modeling your own philosophy when I asked a little bit of backstory on the origin of the book. And then you had a story about going to Spain and hiking and looking for clarity and being stuck in clouds and then turning your thoughts inward. I just want to share with the audience, in case that wasn't explicit, that I think the way that Clark communicates and shares is sort of in line with some of the precepts that he outlines in powerful words. And so why don't we do something fun here, since, this book is substantial. It's like over 300 pages, and a lot of it's practical too. It's not just a storybook per se, but it's really a combination of how-to, in terms of how to identify the powerful words that have emotional resonance and meaning for your life, as well as techniques on how to incorporate that into different applications. So Clark, maybe you can walk us through, or use me as an example, on how to actually start deducing or discovering some powerful words and then applying them to a specific situation.
Well, the book is arranged topically. There are lots of different topics like change and fear and procrastination and success, and each carries a story with it. And at the end of each chapter, there are a series of questions. Sometimes they're just circle this answer or that answer, answer yes or no. And then sometimes I ask for a little short narrative, maybe a couple sentences or a paragraph. And the point of that is to shepherd people into beginning to think about the events of their life, even events that might once have been considered tragic. I look back in my own life, and there are a lot of events and a lot of struggles and adversities, and we all have them. And how did I come out on the other side? Most of the time, it was in better shape than before the struggle or the adversity or tragedy. And so those events I now look at quite differently. It's about reframing those events. And so if people work through the chapters, it will begin to maybe change their thinking about their past and how it can benefit not only themselves, but how they can benefit, how those stories can benefit others.
And so let's say for something along the line of change, and maybe this is relevant. I know you're now transitioning into the next phase of your career. So what would what process would you prescribe or share to identify powerful words that relate to change of a phase in your life or career? And how do you incorporate that in terms of, once you're clear on what those words are, how do you filter it into your communication in different contexts?
Well, those words will be different for everyone based on their own personality and how they view what their philosophy on life is and such. For me, one of the words that pops up for change is a powerful word in and of itself, but a lot of times discomfort or fear is associated with change, because we like things to rumble along smoothly, and that's rarely the case. A lot of things pop up, things happen, even when we don't intend for them to happen. And so, but we can't stay static. Change is inevitable. It's something that we're all going to experience, and we do on a daily basis. So it's getting comfortable with the unknown, and it's getting a different insight into change and how it can benefit you, how it makes you better if you lean into it and learn the lessons that life is trying to teach you. So, uh, like I said, those words will be different depending on the individual that reads the book. One of the exercises in the book that I think everybody should do is a core values inventory, and that's getting in touch with your own inner values. And if you ask the average person, do you have values? They'll say, sure. And you ask them, well, what are they? What's your number one core value? Or can you list me 5 of your top core values? People can name 1 or 2, and then they kind of get stuck because they haven't really thought about it. And most people do feel they have values, but they may not be able to articulate exactly what those values are. So one of the exercises in the book is getting people to identify their top 10 core values. And there's even an appendix in the back of the book that lists almost 400 core values that people have mentioned as meaningful to them. And so people can the reader can scan those lists and identify, oh, yeah, I'm thrifty. That's a value of mine. And the reason that's important, if you are thrifty and you're thinking about buying a Mercedes because all your neighbors have bought one, that may not be the best purchase for you because it's not in line with your core values. I can tell you in my life, anytime I step outside my core values and don't honor them, the result is usually very poor or painful. And when I make decisions in line with my core values, the results are much better. So that's another chapter in the book that I think has great utility for anybody.
Well, I want to underscore a point you made there on the appendix. And, it's easy for people to name off 1 or 2 core values, but to get to 10 requires some actual thought. And I think it's useful to have, as you included, a list of sort of a collection of what a number of people, the distillation of what a number of people have listed as core values. And I've done this exercise in a few different contexts, and it's very helpful actually to just see a whole bunch of different powerful words, and that helps the ones that have personal meaning and relevance sort of jump out to you. Seeing them in context of others, like, for me, I wouldn't say thriftiness is a core value of mine, but for other people, say for my grandmother that grew up in the Great Depression, it's probably a top core value. Mm-hmm. And so there's this influence in historical context that at least partially starts to inform what those values are. But it's something a little interesting as we're talking about it and as I'm thinking about it. The first things that pop up for me and how I apply them would be like novelty and experiential and excitability or excitement and creativity and entrepreneurship and punctuality also comes up too. I realize, that and maybe as I've gotten older or whatever, but punctuality is one of my top life values. Like I find myself on the phone all day. We have interviews scheduled, all these things going on. If I start to get 5-10 minutes behind, then it throws off so many other things. So I've become pretty rigid, at least in a work context of like, if I have a 1 o'clock call, I'm there at 12:59 with my earbud in, looking at the number, and I'll literally wait until it ticks to 1, and then I'll hit call. And it's kind of funny, a result, just using this as an example of a core value, that people will be like, wow, you are right on time. And so to get that reflected back through actions that we take that are in line with our core values, I smile when I hear that, because I'm like, in my own mind, I'm like, that's not an accident. I'm literally sitting there ready to go at the moment of the scheduled event or call. And I guess just one other example to make this kind of interactive is, when I think about novelty and how much I've always craved new experiences, something different, something new. And, historically, that took the shape of being involved in 2 or 3 different entrepreneurial projects at a time. And in a sense, it was pulling my energy in different directions. And in hindsight, sort of undercut the chance for large success in any one of them, because if my interests were in 3 different areas and one starts to grow larger, then it becomes a decision process of, do I take away time and focus from one and allocate it to another, or do I just sort of keep that one tempered and prevent it from growing larger so I can stay involved in a number of different things to a certain degree. And I guess how I've seen that change is like now as a publisher and working with authors, I'm excited by the fact that every book that I work with is a new project. So it satisfies one of my core values of a desire for novelty, but still within the umbrella of, when we're done with the book and launch it, there's a finite endpoint after which, I can turn my focus largely to another book that's going through the publishing and promotional process, but it's still within the same organization. It's building a business asset as opposed to getting interested in going in all these different unrelated fields. So yeah, I've reflected on that a little in preparation for this interview. And I think maybe that's helpful to illustrate for people that are watching and listening to us here on how you can both identify and then become conscious of how you're integrating these things into your life or not, and getting new insight that can be helpful. Because I find that when I've become conscious of core values, like I named punctuality and novelty, and when I can consciously integrate those into my workflow, into my daily life, then it builds a momentum and I feel congruent as opposed to fractured or pulled in different directions or frustrated, and perhaps frustrated without being able to put my finger on why. Eventually I can determine that it's, some conflict, some parts conflict in between a core value and the actual actions that I'm taking. So I'm curious, what's your reaction to that?
Well, that's it's spot on. I mean, you have identified some of your words of power, which are your core values. And when you honor them, you find that you're more connected to what you're doing as opposed to dishonoring them or ignoring them. And you find yourself at odds with what you're doing. So it doesn't matter what your business is. It doesn't matter what your message is. It doesn't matter what kind of relationship you have. If you honor your core values in those activities, you're going to be more successful at whatever it is you do. You're going to have a better marriage. You're going to make wiser decisions with your money. You're going to have a better message for your company or your business, and people will feel that, because you know what? You feel that when you're honoring your core values.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And so, yeah, I think we dove into that, and thanks for sharing and helping illustrate one of those points. I'm really curious now because you've got 2 books out, another one in the works, and even another one that's being published with my original publisher for Lifestyle Entrepreneur, Morgan James Publishing. So now, by the end of this year, you'll have 4 books out in less than 2 years total time. I'd love to hear your process around, one, how you just think about the whole act of writing and creating, because, from my point of view, you're fairly prolific in terms of output. And what, lessons have you distilled, or what advice can you give to people that are perhaps struggling to complete their first book and maybe have been working on it for a long time?
Well, let me just say, if you're going to wait till you feel like it, you're never going to do it, because you're never going to feel like it. You're going to have to schedule some time. And I like your method, Jesse. You have this 1, 2, 3, 4 method of devoting time to a business or an enterprise, which is 1 or 2 hours a day, 3 or 4 times a week, is a great start. But you're going to have to carve out some time and sit down at the computer. I call it the BIC method, BIC, like the pen, but it's butt in chair. That's what BIC stands for. Put your butt in the chair, get in front of the computer, and start writing. The words will come. Any random thought will do. And once you get into it, part of your mind will open up and show you where to go. And whatever you write today, you can always rewrite tomorrow or correct tomorrow. It's just important to develop that habit of sitting down and writing. With powerful words, I told you that story. The second book I wrote was The Graduate's Handbook. your no-nonsense guide for what comes next. And it's a gift book for graduating high school students, college students, or graduate students. It was a natural extension of Powerful Words because I took a lot of the one-line pearls in that book that could stand alone as a quote and assembled them in some order with a lot of quotes from antiquity and recent history that I liked from different writers and philosophers and famous people, and along with some basic good advice for people just starting out in the world of business or getting out on their own. And so it was an extension of that book. The third book was Reignite, and it's a workbook, the Reignite workbook.
There it is.
Yeah, from burned out to on fire.
Let's just get that on camera there for a second, the Reignite workbook. Love that cover design. Look at that smiling face.
Listen, that you did a great job with laying that out and getting the cover done. About 2009, I went to my partner. I practiced in Goldsboro with a single partner, and we had a small group practice, just the two of us. And I went to him in 2009. I said, look, I'm going to have to make some changes or I'm going to have to quit medicine. And the reason I felt that way is I had become burned out. And job-related burnout, there's a detectable rate of job-related burnout for any profession. It just happens to be screaming high in medicine. It's one of the highest burnout rates of any profession right now, along with dentists and lawyers and accountants, school teachers, policemen, and firemen. They sort of top the list. And the hallmarks of burnout are emotional exhaustion, where you feel like you just can't give of yourself anymore on an emotional or psychological level. The second hallmark is depersonalization, where you become cynical. You come to feel almost like the client or customer or patient deserves what's happening to them because you've become so cynical. And then the third one is a lack of a sense of personal accomplishment, where you feel like nothing you do is making any difference. And I had hit all three of those. Now, those are the hallmarks. They're not the causes. The causes, there are 6 major causes, and they are work overload, lack of control, absence of fairness, insufficient reward, breakdown of community, and conflicting values. And we were talking about that a moment ago. So you can take a passionate, on fire, purpose-driven individual and put them in the wrong work environment, and you will burn them out every time. And 90% of the time, it's the work environment that burns out individuals. So I reached that point. And I made a few changes. My partner said, well, do whatever you need to do. I don't want you to leave. And so I made a few changes. One of them was cutting back on my hours. I went to 3 days a week. I got off I was on like 10 different boards. Every time I turned around, I was having a meeting somewhere. And so I got off of all of them except the 1 or 2 that I really cared about. And I began to run more, exercise more, take better care of myself, get more rest. And within 2 weeks, the transformation was just amazing. And I began to wonder if any of my colleagues were feeling this way. So I went online, and it didn't take but 5 or 10 minutes to figure out this was a big, huge problem, and it wasn't just me. And so I began to read about it, study it. I began to give talks on job-related burnout and wellness talks and work-life balance talks, and they were well received. And so after I got those first 2 books done, I thought, well, it's time for a change. I've left clinical medicine, and so what am I going to do with myself? And work-related burnout is one of the things I want to put some energy and effort into. I want to conduct some workshops, do some consulting and personal coaching along those lines. And so I created the workbook, which you just held up there a minute.
Yeah, and I want to actually touch on that a little bit more and show, since, here we are on the Book Business and Brand Building Summit. This is a great illustration of how, a workbook is something that naturally lends itself to business development. And so, for example, if we open up here and look inside a little bit, it's got some prompts and exercises.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm also showing off the layout here a little bit, but it's a combination of information as well as application. And so some identifying historical figures and then tying that into, how they perhaps experienced burnout and dealt with it. And ultimately, with areas to write and include your own answers, this is one example of how a book naturally becomes a developmental tool for doing live workshops and working with people in that type of a context, right? So all of a sudden, the book goes beyond just something that has intrinsic value that people can buy and read, but now turns into a supplementary resource for a live event. Or for a group coaching program, things of this nature. And I think that that's a great illustration of one way that a book can be directly applicable to business development and brand building, seeing how, you've largely had your label be Dr. Burnout, right? You're working with people that have burned out. And so what's the opposite of being burned out? It's being on fire. And so, just from a semantic perspective, if you have Dr. Burnout, who's got the Reignite workbook with the subtitle From Burned Out to On Fire, then it's cohesive and it's integrated and it lends itself to a number of what we can call a back-end product or service offering. And truly, that's where a lot of the earning potential really exists. Because say you get a copy of this book online for $17.95, but then you say, well, you know what, I'd love to join this weekend seminar, and maybe that's $300 or $500, or you do some one-on-one coaching work, and that's hundreds of dollars or $1,000+ per month. The differential between a book sale and the earning potential from what that book enables is one of the key, really the foundational element of what I want people to come away with through viewing all of the different interviews and learning from all of the different people I've invited onto the summit.
Absolutely. That workbook or a book is your next level business card. It really does open some doors that might not ordinarily be open. Now, as an extension of that workbook, the next book that I'm working on, and I'm about halfway through it, is the Reignite book. Instead of a workbook, an actual book. And of course, it will incorporate elements of the workbook in it, but it will be, I will elaborate more on burnout, its causes, how to mitigate it or alleviate it and prevent it, along with some of my own stories and stories of some of my colleagues. And so I'm about halfway through that book, and that'll be my fourth book.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's really special. We have a few other people on the summit. Depending on when you're watching this, you may have seen my interview with Steve Scott, who has upwards of 50 books in the market. But these are a little bit different in terms of his type of writing is really identifying like a niche, in his case, habits and productivity, and having still valuable, meaningful books, but a little bit shorter format. The thing I want to underscore with Clark is that, he's cranked out now 4 full-length books in under 2 years. And so I kind of want to circle back to what we were saying about, actual writing practice. And you called it BIC, butt in chair. I like that one. You referenced one of the methodologies that I put forth and have made videos on and done trainings on, which I call 1, 2, 3, 4, which is really spending 1 to 2 hours a day, 3 to 4 times per week on let's just say on writing your book. And it's something that's manageable even if you still have a full-time job, even if you still have obligations, family, relationship, organizations, etc., that you're involved in. If you care even a little bit, you can find 1 to 2 hours a day, 3 to 4 times a week. And what you do with that time is just block it out, put it in the calendar, put some lines through it, whatever you need to do to know that that is sacred time when you are focused 100% on the task at hand. And here's what happens. even at the very, very lowest end of that spectrum, 1 hour a day, 3 times a week, you'll still begin to build momentum. And if you go at the higher end, 2 hours a day, 4 times a week, then you build momentum and accomplish more quicker.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens is, and there's actually a lot of studies around this as well, that if, for example, 1 to 2 hours a day, 3 to 4 times a week is a lot better than 8 hours 1 day a week. So if you just say, I'm going to do my hustling on Sunday, and Sunday you spend the entire day writing and working on stuff, then you got Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday doing something completely different. When Sunday comes around again, it's going to be a huge mental hurdle to get back into the mindset and into the flow state that you would otherwise mostly stay in if you're doing it consistently in smaller blocks of time, punctuated throughout the week. And the second thing that happens is your subconscious goes to work. So if you're doing 1.5 hours a day, then you don't do anything the next day, but you've got another 1.5 hours blocked off the following day. Subconsciously, you're preparing and you kind of know where you left off and can jump right back into that flow and start being productive almost right away. And these are things that I found that worked for me, both in starting and managing businesses that I've founded or co-founded, as well as in working on book projects and truly even doing coaching, as like the consistency of touch points or the consistency with which you focus on a task at hand builds a momentum that, just like the law in physics, the law of inertia, is that an object in motion tends to stay in motion. So the difficult part is getting into motion. And that's why I think, Clark, I'll get your reaction on this in a second. But when you say butt in chair, I smiled, because if your commitment is just to put your butt in your chair and put your hands on a pen and a piece of paper, then the rest of it starts to take care of itself. It's just that threshold that divides inaction to action. And once you are in action, then it's not so much of a thought process about, should I start doing this, and what am I going to write, and is anybody going to care? Those are thought loops that go on when you're not in action. But when you're taking action, it becomes, well, maybe I should word it this way, or what if I incorporated this topic, or what if I talked about this story when this happened? And now you're thinking along a more productive line of thought, because you're thinking about the project itself instead of looking at it objectively and wondering if it even, and starting to honestly talk yourself out of even engaging in that process. So, I guess the final thing I'd say on that is there's an Olympic trainer, somebody that trains Olympic athletes, and he doesn't meet up with a client, with an athlete, and say, okay, today you're going to break the world record for the 100-yard dash. He says, no, your commitment every day is to sit down in a chair and put on your left running shoe. Because what happens after you put on your left running shoe? You put on your right one, and then you get up, and then you go outside, and then you start your workout. And so if you can lower the bar in terms of the commitment you're making to yourself to be just enough to cross that threshold and get into action, then that's where the magic starts to happen. Clark, you want to expand on that or share your own experience?
I agree with everything you said. One excuse after another just signifies a lack of commitment. What you were talking about there a minute ago is called activation energy. And that's the energy required to initiate action, to start to put yourself in the chair and get in front of the computer and pick up the pen. That's called activation energy. It's the same amount of energy required for this. Imagine it's the dead of winter and you just snuggled in your bed under the covers, and maybe even drifted off to sleep for about 15 minutes. And then you wake up and happen to think, did I lock the back door? The amount of energy it would take at that point to get up out of the bed, walk downstairs, and check the door is the same amount of energy that is required if you're fully awake and the computer's over there and the chair's in front of it, and going over and getting in that chair and starting to write. It's that same amount of energy. It's called activation energy. And so the biggest obstacles we face are the ones we place in front of ourselves. and it's getting over that hump. It's getting that enough of that energy to start. And there's really no excuse for getting your words out, because you can get them out in so many different ways today. If you are averse to sitting in front of a computer and typing on a keyboard, then I've got an app on my phone called Easy Voice Recorder. A lot of times I'll be driving and I just switch it on and start talking, because a thought comes to me that I want to retain and I want to expand on. And so I'll just talk into the recorder and I can have that transcribed later. You can have somebody interview you and record that and have that transcribed. And I know you talk about that in one of your book summits, is having somebody interview you. It's a good way to get a couple thousand words out and on out of you and onto paper. And just think about this: 500 words a day for 80 days. That's a 40,000 word book. And so it doesn't take a lot, but it takes just getting started and being consistent as time goes by. A lot of people who, if you ask them, I think the majority of people say they would like to write a book, yet a small percentage of the population will, because people just can't find that motivation or enough of that activation energy to get started. But you're right. Once you get started, it kind of feeds on itself, and you start getting excited as you see your project come together, and it just makes you want it. Once the first book was out, it made me want to write another one instantly.
Well, actually, that's a good. I'd love for you to share, the difference in how you felt and in how people experienced you and interacted with you when one day you were working on a book, and then another day, a few weeks later or whatever, you've now got the book that sits behind you in your hand, and you can give it to people. And I believe you had copies at your office or your physician practice. What was it like to be on the other side of the coin? Because, I don't think people, I know this has been my experience too. Working on a book can feel like a huge task. It is a big task, and it can be a very solitary one. But what I didn't think about and love about having written a book is the feedback and the stories that people share that have found it through some way or another, read it, applied the ideas in it to their life, and experienced a result to the point where they wanted to reach out and share with me what that result was. So let's give a little motivation to people on, what it was like after the book came out, and now you're officially a published and indeed best-selling author.
Well, everybody has the same reaction, whether it's a stranger or somebody who knows you. The eyebrows go up, the eyes widen, they say, "You wrote a book?" And they smile, because they realize what a task it is. It carries a lot of, social proof or social weight. You say, "Yes, I'm an author. I have a book." And I wasn't prepared for how my patients reacted, because I put just a small sign of the book on the wall in my office and said, "It's out. If you want a copy, I have some here for sale." And patient after patient said, "You wrote a book? I can't believe you wrote a book. When did you write a book?" And so it's an instant conversation starter. And of course, that leads into what the book's about. And you can begin to give people your message. I remember I was on an airplane and I had a copy of my book with me, and I wanted something out of my satchel. And so I'm pulling out items, and one of them was my book, and I laid it on my lap, and the person next to me said, "Powerful words. Is that a good book?" And I said, "Well, I think so. I wrote it." And it was an immediate conversation starter. They got excited about it, wanted to know about the book, and I ended up signing my copy and giving it to them.
I'm sure you just accidentally took your book out and placed it face up on your lap, right?
I just accidentally did that. But they loved the experience. I loved the experience. And it will change not only, it will change people, how they see you will change, but how you see yourself will change. It will give you a different kind of confidence. And it was just an awesome experience. And like I said, once the first one was out, I think there's a lot more in me that I want to get out.
Yeah, it's interesting, because, for me, I wrote my book, Lifestyle Entrepreneur, and had a good run, about 18 months or so with it. I got to tour around Asia and then rewrote it and released it in the US and the rest of the world. And, I even created basically a full another book worth of content, um, in this case, about how to write and publish a book, basically the work I do as a publisher. But I stopped short of releasing it. And I found that, even now I'm working on another book, and it's interesting to see where resistance comes up inside of myself, even though I find that I love working with authors all day, day in and day out. And I find that I can be very high leverage in terms of, providing my accumulated experience to an author like yourself, or all of the authors who have books behind me on this wall. And it's nice to see that in your case, writing one book put the fire under you to do another and another, where for me, going through the whole traditional publishing process twice I turned the entrepreneurial part of my brain on and said, well, I see how I can do publishing in a better, more perhaps creative way, basically starting the publishing company I wish I had from day one. And I made that my next mission, as opposed to writing subsequent books and pursuing a career strictly as an author. Any thoughts on that? Because I know you also have applications for your book, like with the Reignite workbook turning into workshops and training materials.
Well, Powerful Words has led to the concept of Powerful Words legacy. The story is you. And that's a framework I've developed for people who feel like they have something in them that they want to get out, a book perhaps, or just the stories of their life, something that they can put down on the paper and pass along to their children or their grandchildren. It's interesting. I wish I knew more about my grandparents and their parents, and I know virtually nothing about them because they passed before I was old enough to appreciate their presence in the world. And how great would it be if I had something that they had written about their life and how they felt about certain things and what their experience with success was, or what their experience with anything, education or hardship, or what did they feel was their greatest achievement? What did they feel was their uh, uh, worst tragedy? And how did they come out on the other side of that? I mean, you talk about interesting reading. That would be so awesome. And no, it probably wasn't sell 1 million copies, but I would give $1 million for a copy if I had it. And so I'm developing this framework to help guide people through a process that will eventually lead to something along those lines, a lasting legacy, something that they can leave to their family, or something that they can use in terms of messaging for their own business. Because again, it will get them in touch with their own words of power, and it will help them better connect with people on an emotional level, and that would include their customers or their clients.
I think that's a great segue into another application. I mean, why don't you share, not to put you on the spot if you don't have it memorized, but what is that framework that comprises, identifying and creating your powerful legacy?
Well, I use the word powerful, which is in the title of my book. And P is for probe. And probe is about uh, beginning to look at the stories of your life. And it's just that mountaintop moment that I had where you begin to pause and reflect about when your life changed direction or when you pivoted, and those stories of your life that really shaped you and continue to shape the person that you are. And so you begin to, the process begins with probing those stories. The O is open up, and that is begin to um, be 100% authentic about writing your story. You're going to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And sometimes that's that can be quite uncomfortable. Uh, Ernest Hemingway was once asked, is it easy to write a book? And he said, sure, you just sit down at the typewriter and bleed. And what he was referring to is sometimes the difficulty when it comes to writing about yourself or something where there may be some guilt or shame attached to it. But I can tell you this, as hard as it is so healing to get some of those events that were very uncomfortable, even to this day when you think about them. Describing how you felt, what happened, what it was like, and what it's like now. Going through that process is really very healing, and it may be difficult when you do it, but again, you come out on the other side in much better shape. And so, opening up and being willing to be 100% authentic and vulnerable is the O. Of course, the W is write, and you begin to write your stories down, or have them transcribed if you have somebody interview you, or if you do an audio project, make an audio file, have that transcribed. But in some way, begin to jot down those stories and the particulars about those events. E is envision, and that's envision the business, the activities, the what kind of house you want to live in, what kind of car you want to drive, all those things in life you think you want in the future. Begin to envision your preferred future, and write down what that's like, because you know where you are now, and if you know where you want to end up, then you can begin to take some steps to get you from where you are to where you want to be. And so, beginning that process of looking at your preferred future is the E. The R is reframe, and that's a big one for me. And that's looking at those events in your life when you would say, well, that was a big adversity or a big tragedy, and that was bad. But more times than not, I ended up on the other side in much better shape than before the event occurred. And I can tell you that all the events where I thought this is the best thing that's ever happened to me, it all turned into a big pile of, what excrement. So it's odd how life teaches us like that. But it's reframing those events. It's taking a look at those events and seeing how they helped you in life. So that if you're going through something particularly tough right now, you can begin to entertain the possibility that maybe life is trying to teach you something, and that when you do emerge from it, you're going to be better off than before you went through it. F is formulate a plan, and that's where someone like you would come in. Formulate a plan to get your words either published or somehow put together in a form that you can share with other people. That can be done very inexpensively these days as an ebook, all the way up to self-publishing through Create Space. You can end up with a paperback book, but begin to think of what kind of form you would want your stories and your messages to be in. And then the U is unleash. You're going to unleash your story either to your family or in your business or to the world in case of a printed book. And then the L at the end of powerful is you've just created your lasting legacy. This book, Powerful Words, I don't know if it'll ever sell 1 million copies, but I know it will outlast me. It will be something that I created that will have a lifetime that's longer than mine. And so that's the framework, Powerful, and I'll be fleshing that out and working out the details, and hopefully have a webinar later this year using that framework.
And I hope when you're ready to do the book that I'm the guy that gets the call.
Absolutely. Well, so you've gotten several calls from me already.
That's very true. That's very true. So good. That's a great application, and also illustrates, a point on writing and content creation, which is using an acronym, as Clark just described, powerful, And each letter in Powerful becomes a chapter or a section that is expanded into a word or a short combination of words. And just having a framework like that and sitting down and do your 1 to 2 hours a day, 3 to 4 times a week, gives you enough of a structure to make tangible progress and not be stuck looking at a blank sheet of paper, wondering what exactly to put down. And so this has been a very fascinating and engaging interview and call. So I thank you, Dr. Clark, for joining, and I thank everybody for listening, of course, and being a part of the Book Business and Brand Building Summit. And Clark, if you have a final word or two of wisdom that you'd like to impart, this would be a great time to do so. And then please feel free to give some shout outs on where people can learn more about you or find you and connect with you.
Well, my message is very short and very concise and very clear. It's start. Just start. The world needs to hear what you have to say. And until you get your message out, no one will know what it is. And so just start. If you want to know more about Dr. Burnout or what I do, you can go to clarkgaither.com. That's very easy. It's just my name, clarkgaither.com. I also have a website for the book, Powerful Words. It's Powerful Words Book, and a site under construction for the Graduate's Handbook. It's thegraduateshandbook.com.
Very conveniently named URLs there. And Clark Gaither is spelled like so. Clark Gaither without the MD, clarkgaither.com for everybody checking this out. And thanks so much. I think this is a very fascinating, far-sweeping conversation that we also got a chance to do some real applications, both on writing techniques, productivity, even how to avoid burnout, and all the way over to how to do a content structure and outline, and in between looking at how to identify and apply some powerful words and core values into all aspects of our life. So for that, I'm grateful.
And wow, we talked about a lot of stuff.
I know, it hasn't even been a full hour, and we covered a lot of ground. So, with that, thanks again for joining us here on the Book, Business, and Brand Building Summit. And we will see you in another interview, another video. So Clark, take us home, and we're going to shut this down.
Listen, I appreciate it. Thank you very much, Jesse.
All right, everybody. See you soon. Take care.